feel like that's the official opening now to any Zoom session. This meeting is being recorded. It's like the ding at the start of, I don't know, something. So if we can wrap up that poll, Amber.
Yep.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for rocking up to an online, oh, interesting, 77% have more than 30%. We've got one each at 1 to 10 and 21 to 30. One person who's got no idea. Fantastic. Okay. So, hello, welcome to our workshop today, Unstable Connections, Unmuting Multilingual Learners While Working Inside the Zoom Box. My name is Jodie Martin. My colleague Amber Shaw is also joining me today. You can see her on the camera as well. Both of us are linguists and academic English teachers at Vantage College, where we work with international students. And so what we want to give you today is some of our insight on how to support multilingual learners online, particularly with the shift to online. Just to start us off, can I get you to just really quickly in the chat box, tell us where you're from, the Vantage people, you can say Vantage, we know that. Everyone else, what faculty, what area, what discipline? Just quickly give us a snapshot of what areas we're from, just to see what we're dealing with today. And this is where I start using my waiting music. Yes, Jen, where you're from, Vantage. Linguistics, woo, another linguist. Political science. Wow, awesome. Lots. Hello, hello everyone. Hi, welcome. Hi, John. Yes, snapshot. Everyone can talk to everyone. It's great. Welcome. It's Thursday. It's almost the end of the week. It's a beautiful summer's day. Let's get on to this. Now, to start off, I'm going to click on the right button. To start off, we want to talk about how you want your Zoom to be set up for this. We did call this Inside the Zoom Box, which kind of forced us to use Zoom, but there's also particular reasons why we use Zoom. So we'd like you to, first of all, as you should know by now, mute your microphones. If you have any questions, do pop them in the chat. Amber's going to be monitoring the chat, interrupting me if needs be, answering you if needs be. It's going to be fantastic. We're doing a great teamwork thing here. And we'd like you to set it to speaker view. Now, the reason for that is this. Depending on what you've got set up for your screen, maybe you've got it on a gallery view and you've got something like the top right-hand corner here where you've got me hovering over the screen. And that means you have to drag me around if I put any information on the screen to put me into the right position. And it's like moving from side to side. If you do click on speaker view, you should get something like the bottom left-hand corner where you can have both things equal size. You can also drag the middle gutter to move it into position to make one thing bigger or smaller. And for reasons that will become clear, it's important that you can see me and can see me clearly in this presentation. So hopefully, if you didn't know already, these are your options for Zoom. We also wanted to show you this because it's good pedagogic practice, showing students how you want them to look at things and where to look. So moving into the actual presentation itself, we did title this Multilingual Learners. And the question is, who are our multilingual learners? Now, we do want to problematize this. We went backwards and forwards on what to call this. And as you've identified, some of you have 100% multilingual students. Some of you have few, some of you don't know. And actually, it's kind of hard to find out for sure. Maybe you're thinking about this sort of information. From the UBC website, we can see that 28% of Vancouver students are international, 18.3% of Okanagan students are international. Maybe that's what you think it is. It's still a significant proportion, but that's not the whole story. Not all of the international students are multilingual. So we know from the Planning and Institutional Research Office, they don't collect data on languages, but they do collect citizenship data. And of the international students, the top nationalities for UBC include countries which have English as an official language. USA, UK, and India. So not all international students are multilingual, is the first point. Not all the information still. So what other information can we grab? So the Equity and Inclusion Office did a small survey and they found 15% of students reported a first language other than English. We know from SFU that 40% self-identify as having an additional language. And from the census data of Vancouver itself, local students and local people have a very multilingual environment. So 41% of Vancouver residents have a non-official language as their primary language, as their first language. As their mother tongue, so to speak. This means that a lot of people are coming in, lots of domestic and local students might also be multilingual. And importantly, 2.8% of Vancouver residents have English and a non-official language as their primary languages. So we're not suggesting that all multilingual students need support. There are a lot of multilingual students who have full facility in English. However, we still want to argue a key point about language, that language awareness is useful for all students and for all teachers. And there are major wins by being a little bit more aware of the language you use, the language you deliver, and how you teach it. So for all students, focusing on language and meaning supports them. So this is not only international English as an additional language students, it's also the domestic students who speak English as an additional language, particularly Quebecois, First Nation students, other communities and cultures. Otherwise disadvantaged students, otherwise non-traditional students, for example, first generation students who come to university without having that, without having parents who've studied at a similar level and therefore are coming new to this sort of academic language environment. Pretty much language awareness is helpful for anyone who hasn't studied your field for the last 5 years already, which we have to acknowledge is probably going to be a lot of our students. It's not only helpful for all students, it's also helpful for teachers. Focusing on language does have wins for the instructor. It can save you time in the long run. Teaching the language of your field is part of teaching your field. And it does bring about more effective learning in the moment, in the short term. And it can save time in the long run, because if the students learn the language of your field when you teach it, they're more likely to use it when you're evaluating them, which means they'll do better in their evaluations, which means it saves you time marking, which I think is a goal that we don't bandy around often enough. So this willingness to come to a class on this willingness to be aware of language does suggest that you're all quite aware of the needs of your students and willing to do something about it. And some of what I'm going to tell you is not going to be revolutionary, but we want to give you another angle to look at this. Now, the first step, though, is we are dealing with online education at the moment. And there are some hazards that are common across all student groups, but we want to draw your attention to how these have particular impact on multilingual students. So first up, at Vantage, they did a survey of the students after the last year and found that 18% had problems with access. Now, this included getting kicked off Collaborate Ultra and coming back on again and off again multiple times. Maybe it was problems with your connection, your Wi-Fi access, your devices, and so on. But if 18%, almost 1 in 5 students are having problems at some point in time, that's very disrupted learning. And disrupted learning, of course, makes it hard to follow a lesson, but even more so when you're grappling in an additional language, where you can't predict as well what the language patterns indicate, what the task design was going to be, what the instructions were. You need to use more of your energy and attention to focus on that. And if you're grappling with a variable internet access, that's going to be even more challenging. Secondly, we're all well familiar with Zoom exhaustion. You guys are here online for I don't know how many times in the last couple of months you've had Zoom meetings. We all know Zoom exhaustion is real. For international students or multilingual students, the cognitive load of operating in another language is kind of similar to Zoom exhaustion, actually, particularly depending on how much work they have to do with that. So once that international language is mediated through that screen, limited to that moment, then there's more exhaustion that can take place. And there's a lot of research on different aspects of that, but we want to acknowledge that working online is intensive for everyone involved, and operating in an additional language adds a layer of technicality and difficulty that we may not be aware of if we don't stop and think about it. But the main thing we want to focus on is how we make meanings. So the main angle we're going to talk about for how to think about what you're providing with your students, how you're supporting your multilingual students, but also how you're supporting them online, is through this notion of modes. So when I say modes, modes get used in different ways in different areas. What I mean is a channel or medium of communication. And there are many different ways and mediums and channels of communication. Some of them, a brief summary, are on the screen now. So speech is what I'm doing now. It's both what we say and how we say it. So the fact that I'm talking, the language that I use when I speak is different from the language we use when we write. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but it's very difficult, but speech just forms one mode of communication. Text or writing, all the different forms of writing that can happen in the class. This can be slides, handouts, textbooks, whiteboard, anything like that. The students text messaging on the side, whatever the case may be. Text is another mode of communication. Gesture, you can tell from seeing me on the screen that I can't stop gesturing as I go along, but we use gesture in different ways to support language. So this might be supporting speech like I'm doing now by emphasizing certain words, or it could be pointing to the part of the screen. I don't know which part. My screen's over here. I think your screen's over here, pointing to that bit. Hopefully that worked. To emphasize different points of information. Visual, there are so many categories of visual modes that I don't even want to go into it. Images, diagrams, graph, the use of space, the layout, the color, the formatting, the color, all of it is part of the visual modes. And of course, we've got different things going on in person, in face-to-face classes, and online. Physicality. Now, I've separated this out from gesture because I think it's important to acknowledge that gesture is these big movements, but there are quieter body language and facial expression things that happen that have an impact. And then multimodal is not a mode, but this combination of modes can come together in different ways. So we can overlay a video, for example, combines image and speech and writing and more and music and whatever. Even more so operating online, these things happen. So if we think about what we do with these in the class, how does that shift online? So one of the things that can happen for students, that students receive differently, is the speech. Now, even if you are delivering exactly the same slides and lesson that you did in person, chances are you change your speech. Now, as a linguist, I can tell you grammatically there are different ways, but I'm going to demonstrate one thing that I've noticed often is the tone of voice. So often when we speak in a class, we're standing in front of a group of people, so we use our teacher voice. We all have teacher voices. It's very weird when you hear somebody's teacher voice when you haven't heard it before. But instead, what we get a lot of in people recording is the late night radio show voice where, hello and welcome to Thermodynamics 101 or whatever you're teaching, which is great when you're trying to go to sleep, but it's not so good if you're paying attention to thermodynamics or nominalization or some other technical information. An example of this is when last year I was tutoring students and I lost my voice for the first time in my life. And so I had all these student meetings and they came into the room and I'd have to say, I've lost my voice, I'm going to whisper. And within a few minutes, they very often whispered back to me. Because when somebody's whispering to you, that indicates that this interaction is secret, is quiet, is personal. When we're teaching, and we're teaching online for students, if we're speaking without, this is something to pay attention to voice, versus when we're speaking with our personal voice, because we're in the corner of our room and it's night and our cats are looking at us and our kids are trying to sleep, then it's a different type of interaction. So speech can change when we move online, and trying to be aware of that will help your students. The text as well can change. We go from having a slide on the screen and a whiteboard over there and a whiteboard over there and a handout in front of you and the computer screens in front of them to it all being condensed at the same time. The gesture, I am limited to my gestures on the screen. I'm trying to point in the right direction, but my screen's over there and your screen's over there. It's interesting. The visual images, we've got both more opportunity to include visuals and less, and the physicality can change. As a teacher, I don't know how many of you have taught with Collaborate Ultra, but usually if you share screen, and one of the reasons we chose Zoom over Collaborate Ultra is if you're showing a slideshow, you either see the slide big or you see the person big. So if the person is tiny in the corner of the screen, you're going to lose all this facial expression and body language and all these things I'm doing because this is the sort of teacher I am. And multimodal. Online we have multimodal in person as well. But online, suddenly we have chat boxes. We can have videos and animations and stuff integrated and overlaid in a new way. And dealing with the simultaneous communication of the teacher speaking, the chat box operating with chat language and emoji, which is somewhere between speech and writing, the teacher speaking more formally, the writing being even more formal. It's very complex linguistically. So all of these are things that can change for students online. And what we want to argue is that in thinking about that shift online, we want you to think about how you presented things in person, how those have to change online, and how they can change online. But one thing that I haven't seen talked about as much that I want to acknowledge is that when we teach online, there are things that change for the teachers as well. So as a teacher, yes, our own speech can change when we're online, but also we're not getting the speech from the students. Now, I'm not saying you have to force all your students to turn their microphones on, but this is a shift of feedback, of information, of communication that happens. You also get the shift of physicality. If you can see your students getting bored or falling asleep or looking really interested, you can respond to that as well. I've got a good example of this, hopefully, if I can think how to do this. So this is my Zoom profile pic that I put up to try and look interested if I turn off my video. But even if I sound really excited with this picture happening at the same time, it's not quite the same effect, is it? That physicality, that expression that you get from students. At the moment, Jen, you look so excited to be listening to me at the same time because I'm getting that facial expression from you. Meanwhile, I can see Amber laughing, which is great. It makes it clear that I'm not in a room by myself talking to myself. And we potentially lose that online, and that changes things. And gesture, like I said, suddenly our gestures are confined to in front of our shoulders. We now wave up here instead of up here or down here. And this changes how we can draw emphasis. There is research recently that shows that in a video, students learn better if they can follow the gaze of the teacher. So the teacher looks to the whiteboard or looks to the slide, they point to them. It's more effective for learning. And this is something that's important to take into consideration for them as well as for us. So as an example of this, we want to show you, we're going to use a land acknowledgement. You might have noticed we didn't do it at the start, not because we weren't going to do it, but because we wanted to integrate it as a focus. But one of the other pieces of information that is encouraged for, particularly for working with additional language students that we wanted to demonstrate is using captions. So I'm going to turn them on now. And I'll give you a moment to get distracted by the captions at the bottom of the screen. So I'm using Google Slideshow, which does do this auto captioning. We had a lot of fun playing with this, but we want to also be aware that there are some issues that we want to draw your attention to as you go along. And I can see Amber happily reading this as we go along, even though she knows what's coming. So, like I said, we're going to start, we're doing our example with a land acknowledgement. Obviously, you're all familiar with land acknowledgements if you've worked at UBC, particularly, or in Vancouver for any length of time. Anybody who's new to to Canada might not be familiar with it. Anybody who's new to BC in particular might not be familiar with the particular First Nations of the Vancouver region. So if you just heard it, pay attention. This is one mode just with speech. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I've got to say this is not as offensive as some of Google slideshows attempts to transcribe Tsleil-Waututh. Oh, there we go. This is obviously quite problematic right now. It is sort of analogous to how we're all teaching in technical fields and technical language. And if you're relying on auto transcription, it can generate problems, and we want to acknowledge that. I'll leave it on for now and you can see how it goes, and I'll try and ignore it because otherwise I start trying to find difficult words to see if it'll transcribe. So, like I just said, if you just hear a land acknowledgement, you understand what the land acknowledgement is, but you might not be familiar with the First Nation countries. So adding in the written text that students can follow at the same time makes it easier to understand those new words to them. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Still difficult. 2 modes, having the text supports the speech. As another layer, another mode, if we add in an image, we add, in this case, a cultural artifact to indicate the First Nations we are talking about. This has a different effect, an image of a cultural artifact, than if it was an image of a person or a map of the region and so on. And we've got the online acknowledgement that is recommended at the moment. We would like to acknowledge that we continue to live and work in real and virtual spaces thanks to the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And by using these multiple modes, we can put not only the English versions of those names, but also the First Nations transcriptions of those names front and center, and have that pronunciation guide at the bottom and so on. So that image and text and speech together support understanding those words that may be difficult. And often we're using technical words as analogous to greater academic discourse. It's not just learning technical words, but you can all extrapolate from there a little bit. As a next layer, if you go to the Indigenous portal of the UBC website, there is a video where Musqueam Elder Larry Grant gives a welcome message in multiple language. And this, of course, adds more modes of meaning. You've got that multimodal video experience, the physical expression, the gesture, the posture, the person, the image, the sounds, the additional information, all layered on. And if you haven't seen this resource already, we recommend you check it out and direct your students to it. This is all multiple modes of meaning at the same time. We are dealing with online spaces, so another option is thinking about how these things play out asynchronously with multiple modes coming in different directions and how you're interacting with your students. This is an example that Amber has done with her classes previously, where she provided a personal acknowledgement of her own land acknowledgements, including, you can see here a photo of a village recreation of a Powhatan village and a map of Vancouver. So in this case, she had her students post their own land acknowledgements and privilege acknowledgements, and that's an asynchronous activity which then provides multiple modes and asks students to potentially provide multiple modes at the same time. I'm going to turn off the caption now. Potentially, I said potentially. Oh, that was interesting. So, in brief, overall, so what? What we want to summarize is that supporting multilingual learners, often one of the key things is it involves strategically providing multiple modes of meaning to support, to clarify, to illustrate, to emphasize, and more. When we provided a photo with the land acknowledgement, we gave them some icon to grasp for the knowledge of the First Nations that they may not be familiar with. Similarly, in your field, when you're talking about a new topic, you put a picture of the thing sometimes. That is supporting understanding not only by showing them the picture, but also that understanding of the language you use and how you use it. What we would like to suggest is that you try to be aware of what modes are being gained and lost. So what did you do in the classroom and what's being lost from that? And then what can you additionally do online? And in all things is good pedagogical practice as teachers. They should always enhance your teaching, enhance the learning of the students and not distract from them. And often this means that what you are actually putting into place is principles of universal design for learning. These are not only beneficial for multilingual students, but for students with different abilities and disabilities and so on. And this is good practice to be inclusive and grant access to our content. One caveat though, more modes aren't always helpful. It's not about always using more bells and more whistles and all the different learning styles at the same time. I did like, there's a paper that came out a few months ago by Maya Fiorella and Stoll, which showed that instructional videos are not more effective with extraneous videos. And they call this the seductive details principle. Sometimes being aware of your modes means stripping back, just using one or two modes to keep it simple and then adding layers of meaning as is supportive. So that's the main content of our workshop, but we do want to provide an opportunity to talk in groups and discuss this. Now, the reason for this is you all know, you learn about the abstract principles, but it's not until you apply it and discuss it and make it relevant to your reality that you will actually do something differently. So we do want to break into a couple of groups to discuss this. What we're going to do is we're going to split into two groups, and Amber's going to split us into breakout groups in a moment, and Amber and I will be in one each to help you guys talk. And instead of just coming up with an example, if you have an example you want to talk about, awesome. But I want to talk about different typical activities that we do in class, and such as introducing a new topic or unit, doing group work, doing presentations, different parts of assessment, both delivering and revising and giving feedback. And answer these questions of what modes would you use in class, what modes could support this activity online that might be different, and acknowledging the synchronous asynchronous challenge, how could these variously be done? If you have to go, please go quickly now, we'll organize it. Otherwise, what we're going to do is have this discussion to try and connect this idea of modes and to explain this idea of modes in your own fields, your own classes. We'll discuss this, we'll come back and share, and then we're going to share with you a few quick resources to point you in those directions. Amber, good to go? Okay, we'll go into our breakout rooms and we'll talk to you after. Asking for a volunteer instead of appointing. I will quickly say we kind of bounced around a little bit more in our group looking at different aspects of interacting with students, getting that feedback when you miss that feedback from the video, and how chat has been very productive at the same time. Using things like reactions to give yourself as a teacher that sense of feedback when you're trying to monitor your students. Honestly, I can't remember what else we talked about because it's all a bit of a blur now, but I will wrap things up quickly because we're running out of time anyway. So I'll just share a couple of final slides. And you can choose whatever format to look at me through with this one as you wish. So we did want to share a few resources. There's a lot more to go on, but these were a couple of ones that came across our desk and seemed relevant lately. I referred to the one on instructional video. That's the one, let me use the pointer. This one in the middle is the instructional videos one, which had some interesting points and summaries. This one I want to recommend is from our colleagues at Vantage College. They looked at how unpacking multiple choice questions helped Vantage students slightly more, and it also helped direct entry students. And as a personal plug, we do have started a podcast at Vantage College. The first episode is about this article looking at multiple choice questions. And I'm the host, so hi, please subscribe. We'll also be coming, we've got an episode out on teaching online. We'll have one coming out soon with talking to teachers about teaching online, and we're going to be recording one with Jen on paraphrasing, so please check that out and subscribe, and hopefully that'll be something of use, and it's a little bit easier to listen to than to read the article. So yeah, so that's pretty much most of what we had to present to you guys. As I said, yeah, flat icon is the resource. So I got these slides from SlidesGo. They've got both a Google Doc Google Slides and PowerPoint version, and they've got all these icons and stuff and beautiful designs that I found really useful. So just as a good resource, there's something else to pay attention to. There's Amber and I both have our email addresses and our social media handles online on the screen if you want to get in touch other than this. But if you want to stick around and ask a few questions or anything, feel free. We're happy to talk and chat and soundboard random things and so on. So thank you for joining us.